Hello, and welcome to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are traveling a little further along our expression tool expedition. Specifically, we're going to start looking at the expression assignment dialog box. And how do you get there? Well, that's a good question. You go to your expression tool, and you can right-click on any expression, and in the contextual menu, just about here, we're going to choose Edit Expression Assignment, and that will pull up the expression assignment dialog box. Now, there's a couple other quicker ways to get here. You can just hold down Shift and double click, a normal double click, to pull up that expression assignment dialog box. So that's Shift double click. If you hold down Shift and press Return with the expression selected, you'll get the expression assignment. Or if you have an extended keyboard, Shift Enter will do the same thing. So there's a few ways to actually get to this dialog box. All right. And so what's in this dialog box? Well, there's a few things here, and we might as well start at the top. The first is the alignment point. Now, this is where in the measure horizontally the expression gets attached to. And you can see that I selected the forte here, and you can see that the alignment point is beat 2. And you can literally just change this manually. So if I put a 3 in there, you'll see the expression moved over to beat 3. We can also use partial beats here. So if I put 2.5, you'll see that expression will now get attached between beats 2 and 3, which is interesting because that would be the only way you could actually do that. If you try and enter a expression from scratch and try and get your mouse halfway between, it's going to find whichever one's closer, in this case beat 2. Or if I go a little bit further to the right, it will probably attach it to beat 3, just like that. So through this expression assignment dialog box, that's the only way you could actually get that expression to attach midway between notes, in the case of dynamics anyway. So let's go back and re-enter this on beat 2. Incidentally, we can use EDUs instead of beats if you're really into that. 0 would be beat 1, 1024 would be the next quarter note on beat 2, and etc. So if you really feel like doing a lot of math, you can do that. And now we have an option for grace notes. This is the alignment point. By default, you can drag this forte marking around, for example, left of this main note, and it will never attach to the grace notes. In fact, it will flip over to beat 1 and then flip back to beat 2. So there's no way to actually get this to align to a grace note without going through this menu. And the way that this works is a little bizarre. The number 0 represents the main note, which is the note all the way on the right, visually speaking. And then numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. would be the first, second, third, fifth, fourth, etc. Grace notes. So if you wanted to attach it to the leftmost grace note, you have to put 1. And you'll see that the alignment point will shift over to where that first grace note is. Now, the grand question I have here is why? And the reason I have that question is because, first of all, you'll notice that the dynamic doesn't move. It still stays centered over beat 2. We can move it over to the grace note by holding down Option and dragging it, and you have to hold down Option. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you'll see that the attachment point will jump to the first beat, right? So we do have to hold down Option to actually get it there. And furthermore, why? Because the playback effect will not affect the grace notes in this situation. In fact, if I play my score, you're going to hear the forte marking only apply to this high B here after it loads the sounds. You sort of heard that it was just until the B that you heard the forte markings speak. So again, I don't totally understand why the value of attaching it to a grace note. Incidentally, if you wanted to hear these grace notes at forte marking, the only way to do that, you can go back to 0 here if you want, is to place the alignment point halfway between beat 1 and 2 in this case. So if you put that at 1.5, now the alignment point, although you do have to get it in the right place because I had it manually adjusted. Now it's attached to about halfway between that beat, and it should play back correctly. Yeah. It's just a bizarre thing that it really has no effect attaching it to a grace note, but it is there if you need it. All right, so that is the alignment points and the grace note alignment points. The next thing down in this window is the offset from alignment point, and these are just literally just manual adjustments that you can make, and there's a horizontal and vertical adjustment. Negative horizontals will go left, positive horizontals will go right, negative verticals will go down, positive verticals will go up. So if we put a horizontal adjustment here of say 0.2 and a vertical of let's say -0.25, you should see this go off to the right and downwards, just like that. Interestingly, and of course we can always remove manual adjustments to get it back to 0. Interestingly, if you actually just drag it there and then go into that edit expression assignment, you'll actually see the result of your dragging as a horizontal and vertical offset. So this is just sort of codifying exactly how far away from the default position the expression is, whether or not you do that manually or actually enter numbers in this in these fields is up to you. And we can always remove that, and it will go back to 0, as you can see. Now, there's some interesting things that go on when there's layers involved. So I'm going to go over here to my piano part and show you. I haven't moved this forte marking here. I haven't manually moved this at all. I'll just show you right now. I'll put in a fresh forte marking for you, and you'll see that it gets put well below where it should be by default. And the reason for that is because it's avoiding the downstem in the second layer. Now, what's interesting about this is that Finale will calculate essentially a manual adjustment here. And if you go into that expression assignment, you actually see that manual adjustment as being -0.25, right? So technically, Finale is attaching this to layer 1, even though it says that it's on all layers here. It's attaching it to layer 1 and then adding a manual adjustment to make up for the fact that the second layer gets in the way. And interestingly, if I were to go in here and remove the manual adjustment, you'll see that it do just that. It puts it in line where it normally would be if the layer 2 wasn't actually there. All right, I'm going to get into this a little bit soon because there's something else I want to get to right before I talk about that. And if we go back here, the next thing down beyond the offset from alignment point is this option here, scale expression with attached notes. Now, by default, this will be checked. If you have notes that are smaller, in this case, these Q notes are at 75%, the expressions that get attached to those notes will get scaled with it as well, which sort of makes sense. But if you don't want that, you can select the expression, go into the expression assignment, and uncheck that, and then that expression will become normal size, right? It just depends on what you want to do. Sometimes it's if you have a text like this where I have the flute Q text right here, maybe I don't want to see that scaled in that manner, so I can just go to edit expression assignment and uncheck scale expression with attached note, and you'll see that it will go back to normal size. All right, so I'm about to get into something a little bit technical here. I'm just going to move over to my piano part here and this forte marking. I mentioned that the offset from alignment point for this marking in this situation gets a -0.25. So below the scale expression with attached note options, we have these show on options, and the first one here has to do with layers. Now, here's what's interesting, is that when you attach an expression, by default, it will attach to all layers, but technically it's sort of considered attached to layer 1. You can manually adjust this so that you're attaching it to specifically layer 1, 2, 3, or 4 if you want. And there are some reasons for that, particularly when it comes to staff styles. If you're hiding staff styles and you have expressions showing on other layers and stuff, this is why you'd want to use this. However, there's some odd things that go on here, and let me see if I can explain this. Actually, I had to write this down so that I can get this right. So follow me if you can. If an expression's default positioning is set to one of the positions that involve note or entry, and I'm just going to show you what that means. I'm going to go into the expression selection here, position in the expression designer, and I'm talking about the vertical alignment where we have below staff or baseline or entry. That's the thing I'm concerned about. So if an expression's default positioning is set to one of the positions that involve note or entry, and there's an additional vertical entry offset in the default positioning. That's this value here, this additional entry offset of -0.25. If those two conditions exist, then this expression's position when it gets added where layers 1 and 2 are present, will account for the layer that gets in the way. So that's layer 2 in this situation. It's accounting for layer 2 and adding that offset, and fills in that offset number in the expression assignment vertical offset field, which is what I showed you before. This vertical offset is now 0.25, matching that offset, right? As if it's attached to layer 1, but manually moving that value 0.25. Follow me so far? If you then go and use the show on to attach it to layer 2, a bizarre thing happens. Finale will add this offset to the normal offset from the expression designer positioning. So now we're essentially double adding that offset, which is not a great behavior. In fact, I feel like it's a bug, or at least an odd feature bug or something. Until you remove the manual positioning from this marking, which I'm going to do right here, remove manual adjustments, and now I'm removing the vertical offset in the expression assignment, right? So now the only offset it has is the normal one that it gets from the entry offset, the additional entry offset in the expression designer positioning. That's a lot. Did you follow that? This is sort of annoying to know about when you start doing this. Again, let me just enter a fresh dynamic here, and you'll see it go there. The other problem about this is that I just entered a new dynamic, so this should be attached to all layers again, not on layer 2. And again, it has that vertical offset that it added, I guess, as a courtesy. But then if I were to remove the manual adjustment on this, it would go back to where it normally would be without considering layer 2. Again, it's a bit of a strange bug, but that's pretty much exactly how it works. Now, I just mentioned this because you may be wondering, what's the whole point of this? There is a reason that you may want to attach to a layer. Let's say I'm going to attach this to layer 1, and incidentally, when I do that, nothing will happen until I remove manual adjustment again. I do have a staff style set up here that hides layer 2. So if you're doing something that hides layer 2, now notice this forte marking you saw me attached to layer 1. This pianissimo marking here is still attached to all layers, so it's attached to all layers right there. If I choose this layer, this staff style that I created earlier called hide layer 2, what's going to happen is because the dynamic is now attached to layer 1, it's not hiding. That other dynamic, the pianissimo marking, which was attached to all layers actually, will get hidden, even though it's even though I'm only hiding layer 2. That's just sort of the behavior of how that works. If I were to attach this to layer 1, it would remain. All right. So there are some uses for using the show on separate layers, but specifically when it comes to hiding layers with staff styles and stuff like that. So it's a little bit complicated and, frankly, in my opinion, slightly buggy how this works, but that is how it works, and that's just how it goes. Now, the other thing about attaching expressions to layers is that in the expression menu, we actually have an option here in the middle called Favour Attachment to Active Layer. Now, by default, this is turned off. And when you add expressions with this turned off, what you're doing is adding expressions just like this, where it's attached to all layers on the show on. However, if you were to turn that on, then it will matter which layer you're currently in. So right now I'm in layer 1. So if I enter another dynamic here, you'll see that in the expression assignment box, it gets shown on layer 1 right here. If I were to switch over to layer 2 and put a forte marking here, you'll see that the expression assignment now has it showing on layer 2, right? That is because this Favour Attachment to Active Layer is on. Again, if you turn that off and add an expression here, go into the expression assignment, you'll see that it is now showing on all layers. All right, so that's what that does. Again, it's sort of useful if you kind of know what you're doing with staff styles and you need to be attaching a bunch to layer 2 or something. You can do that, and that will add them pretty automatically in that sense. The other thing about this is that with that turned on, Finale will sort of ignore those automatic offsets that it's making when there's multiple layers present. So now I've got that checked, and I'm in layer 1. So now if I create a marking here, you'll see it get in the way. If I'm in layer 2, it will actually consider it because it's now it's getting in the way. Although there still is no vertical alignment point. Again, it's just using the entry offset now from layer 2. So that's sort of how that works. All right. Cool. And now let me show you the next thing down from the show on options. So we can show on layers here. We can also have this is the next thing down here. The show on score and parts, score only, parts only. Frankly, I find this menu right here is the most useful part of this expression assignment dialog box, and there's several really good uses for it. So I have a couple of expressions here that I've created. I've got a VS text here, so this would be for a page turn. And, obviously we don't want to see this in the part, or in the score rather. But if I go into the part, and of course if this actually was a page turn, it would make more sense. But let's say that there's a page turn after the first system here. We definitely want it to show here, but we wouldn't want to show that in the score, right? So this is where that option comes into play. So we go into here, and instead of showing on score and parts, we just select part only, and you'll see it disappear in the score, but it will remain in the part, right? Another good use for this is you may want to, if you're doing some movie scoring, you may want to put like time codes or something. And so if you add a time code here, unfortunately that will also show in the flute part, which is probably not what you want, right? So again, you could just choose this, go into the expression assignment dialog box, and just show score only. And so that will only appear in the score now, and the flute part, it's not there because it's not needed. All right, again, I find that to be the most useful thing within this expression assignment dialog box, particularly with VS, because I use the VS markings a lot in my scores, so I'm always assigning that to parts only. Incidentally, these functions right here will only apply to staff-specific expressions. If I were to enter a tempo mark here, for example, and go into the expression assignment, you'll see that that whole option goes away. You can't even choose one of them. The reason for this is fairly logical. System expressions are kind of set up to show in a specific spot in the score and then specific spots in the parts already. So it wouldn't really make sense to sort of override that with those options there. So again, it won't work for system expressions, just staff expressions. And then finally, let's look at the bottom of that expression assignment dialog box. I'm just going to hold on, set up something here. Let's call this pianissimo here on beat 3. The playback effects. So on playback effect, current layer 1, 2, 3, 4 chords and expressions. Although I really don't understand why the playback would affect the expression, because it is an expression, so I'm not sure the value of that, but you can affect the playback of chords and layers 1, 2, 3, 4, or the current layer, which is really essentially means all layers. Or actually, I think it means whatever layer it's showing on, right? Here's the thing about this, is that particularly with dynamics, and actually with all playback of expressions, Finale considers the MIDI channel as far as playback is concerned. So with a dynamic, for example, it doesn't really do you any good to change the playback effect a different layer unless the layers are set up on different MIDI channels. If you think about this, there's a really good reason for this. So my piano part, if I go into the score manager, you'll see that it's on channel 7. If I open this triangle here to show you the left, right, and left hands, they're also on channel 7, and I can further open these triangles to show you that layers 1, 2, 3, and 4 and everything is also on layer 7. If you think about it, when you enter a dynamic in a piano part between the hands, you want that dynamic to apply to all the layers in both hands, right? So Finale sort of works with this by making sure that the dynamic, and actually any expression, applies to every single layer in that MIDI channel, right? So it's MIDI channel specific. So in order to take advantage of the playback effect current layer 1, 2, 3, or 4, you would actually have to set up your score manager in the piano part, for example, to have separate MIDI channels for each layer, which would sort of be a pain in the neck to set up. You can do it, but then you end up with a lot. It's just a lot of work. I mean, if it's worth it to you, I think you can do that. So, for example, the next available channel I have is 14. I'd have to change layer 2 in the right hand to 14, maybe layer 3, 15, 16, and then from there I'd have to go into a different bank probably for layers 1, 2, 3, and 4. In the left hand, and you can sort of see how tedious that would get. But if you do set it up that way, what you can do then is, for example, choose this pianissimo marking to playback only on layer 2, and then let's say assign a forte marking above here and have this a playback effect on layer 1, right? Now this is going to have no effect again because I haven't changed the MIDI channel, so nothing's really going to happen. But if I had changed all those MIDI channels and made unique MIDI channels for each layer, then these dynamics would affect the layers separately, which is kind of handy if you're doing intricate piano work in that regard. The problem with that, of course, is that once you set it up that way, you kind of have to track the dynamics from the beginning to the end, because again, every dynamic is going to be affecting only one MIDI channel. So you might have to put in some blank expressions and everything to get all the layers to follow the dynamics in the middle of the grand staff. So it's possible to do stuff like that, but it gets a little tedious. And then the final thing I wanted to show you in that menu, the begin playback at options. So again, with the alignment point set up, it's going to start the playback of that expression at that alignment point, which makes sense. So if you play this back, you'll hear that. Hear the pianissimo marking in beat 3. But you can also set this to playback at the beginning of the measure, and it will do just that. Despite where it is, despite where that dynamic is in the measure, it will play back at the beginning. And furthermore, you could actually choose position in measure, which is interesting because irregardless of where the alignment point is, so now I'm holding down Option to drag this all the way to the left, Finale is considering the visual placement of that marking for playback. I'm not sure why you'd want to do this when you can just drag it over there, but this works. Just like that. So even though it's technically attached to beat 3, the visual position is actually before beat 1, so it's getting put there. So so that's sort of the begin playback at options that are available to you. All right, and I think that covers everything in the expression assignment box. Again, I think the two most useful things here are the show on score and parts score only, parts only. And sometimes I use the scale expression option here, having that checked or unchecked. The rest of it, it's a lot of manual adjustments that you can make, but it's there if you need it. And so that's how all of that works. All right, so that's been the expression assignment dialog box. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks for watching, and come back. The next few videos are going to be on the expression designer, which gets pretty involved, so I'm looking forward to that. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.